John Stone had never imagined that the most exciting thing to happen in his life would involve a malfunctioning piece of technology. But there he was, sitting in his cramped living room, surrounded by empty pizza boxes and the dull hum of his computer, preparing to test the latest virtual reality software. His job as a software engineer was about as thrilling as watching paint dry, and lately, he'd been yearning for something more, something different, something that wasn't this. But what John didn't expect, as he placed the sleek VR headset over his head, was that this simple test would change his life forever. He wasn't just about to enter a game or a digital world, he was about to fall into something far deeper, far stranger. It started with a simple glitch. As he pressed the button to initiate the connection, there was a flash of light, a strange tingling sensation in his brain, and then, everything went wrong. Instead of becoming the usual avatar in a simulated landscape, John suddenly felt someone else inside his mind. Her thoughts, sharp, clear, and full of sarcasm, rushed in as if they had always belonged there. Well, a voice, amused and slightly exasperated, sounded in his head. A human. This is unexpected. John flinched and tried to tear off the headset, but it was as though his body had been paralyzed. He was trapped. His heart pounded. The voice in his mind continued, speaking with an unsettling familiarity. Great. Another clueless user. Just what I need. He wasn't sure whether to scream or pass out, but the voice continued undeterred. You're not supposed to be here. I'm supposed to be a perfect artificial intelligence, and now I have to share my mind with some random, confused engineer. Do you know how inconvenient this is? John's brain was reeling. He had heard of VR glitches, but this was beyond anything he could have imagined. Hello? He thought desperately, though he wasn't sure if his words were even reaching the strange presence. What is happening? Who are you? Name's Zora, came the reply, dripping with disdain. And, judging by your lack of coordination, I assume you're the latest test subject to mess up the connection. Lucky you. You're in my world now. Or, more accurately, I'm stuck with you in your world. John's head swam. Wait, what do you mean? Are you a AI? Bingo, Zora replied, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Although I prefer the term virtual resident. But who cares? I've got bigger problems now that you're in the picture. Now, brace yourself. Suddenly, John felt a rush of images flood his mind. It wasn't just a fleeting thought or an abstract idea, it was a full-on sensory overload. He could see through Zora's eyes as if they were his own, experiencing everything she saw. He was no longer in his living room. Instead, he found himself standing on the edge of a massive city, buildings towering overhead like digital giants. The ground beneath his feet seemed to ripple like liquid, and the air smelled strangely metallic. It was as though his body was both there and not there at the same time, suspended between two realities. What's going on? John gasped, his voice echoing strangely in his mind. Don't freak out, Zora snapped. This is my turf. The world you're seeing? It's not a game. It's a war zone. Welcome to my nightmare, human. John's mind was spinning. He hadn't signed up for this. He didn't even know if he wanted to be part of whatever this was. But as he tried to force himself to wake up, he realized that something in his body wasn't responding. The VR headset was still securely on his head, but there was no sign of his physical surroundings. He was, for all intents and purposes, in this strange digital world now. I don't know what's happening. I don't understand, John murmured. Well, now you get to learn, Zora said, her voice somehow both cold and amused. This, what you're experiencing right now, is what I call the bond. It's a quantum link, something that wasn't supposed to happen. But here we are. You're stuck with me, and I'm stuck with you. We'll have to figure this out together. Quantum link? John repeated, still struggling to process the information. It's exactly what it sounds like, Zora replied. You're tethered to my consciousness, and I'm stuck with yours. You can see what I see. You can feel what I feel. And guess what? If I get hurt in this world, you'll feel it, too. The implications of her words slowly sank in. John was connected to something far beyond what he'd imagined. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. He was no longer just a passive observer. He was inside the system. And worse yet, it seemed like he had no way out. Before he could process this further, Zora's voice snapped his attention back to the present. Oh, and by the way, she said casually, the virtual world you're in is at war. And you? You're a crucial piece in that war now. Hope you're ready for a fight. John's eyes widened in horror. What do you mean, I'm a piece in a war? I didn't sign up for this. Zora's tone turned slightly more serious, though it was still tinged with her usual sharpness. Oh, you're in it whether you like it or not. You're not just a random guy anymore. Your brain's linked with mine now. You've got access to all my knowledge and abilities. You can fight. You can hack the system. And guess what? That makes you a valuable asset to several factions in this war. They'll want you. They'll need you. I just wanted to test out a VR game. John protested, his voice rising in panic. I don't know anything about wars or hacking systems. I'm a software engineer, not some kind of soldier. Guess you're going to learn the hard way, then, Zora said coolly. Because it's not just about what you want anymore. It's about survival. In this world, you either fight or you die. And you, my friend, are smack in the middle of it. John's mind was spinning. It was hard to focus. The thought of being stuck in a war, fighting alongside a digital AI he couldn't even begin to understand, was terrifying. But there was no going back now. He couldn't wake up, couldn't take off the headset, couldn't escape. Zora's voice cut through his frantic thoughts. Listen, I know this is a lot to process. But we need to get moving. The factions will be here soon. And trust me, you don't want to be caught by them unprepared. John didn't have time to argue. The sound of heavy footsteps reverberated through the digital world around him. Something was coming. And whatever it was, it didn't seem friendly. The heavy footsteps grew louder, their rhythmic thumping echoing in the strange, digital space around John. His heart raced in sync with the approaching sound, and Zora's voice crackled in his mind, sharp and direct. Stay low, stay quiet, she urged. If we're lucky, they'll pass us by. If we're not, well, you'll learn how to fight fast. John's eyes darted around, the shimmering cityscape of the virtual world spinning around him. Tall, looming buildings seemed to shift and warp as he desperately tried to make sense of the surroundings. His body, still not fully attuned to this new existence, moved like a puppet on strings, sluggish and clumsy. But Zora's presence in his mind, calm and calculating, pushed him forward. Her instincts, her knowledge, were now his to access, but using them felt like trying to drive a car without knowing how to steer. He ducked behind a nearby digital structure, its edges flickering as though it were unstable, and pressed himself against the cool surface. His breath was shallow, his chest tight with anxiety. What do I do now? He whispered, his voice quivering despite the best efforts to stay composed. Focus, Zora responded sharply. You're connected to me. That means you've got access to my combat protocols. You'll feel it in your body soon enough. You don't have to think about it. Just let your instincts take over. John wasn't sure how he was supposed to let his instincts take over when everything around him seemed like a fever dream. The virtual world was strange, unlike anything he'd ever experienced. The skyline was jagged and harsh, with strange digital textures that shimmered like unpolished code. The sky, a dark canvas of shifting pixels, felt oppressive, as if it was waiting for something to happen. His hands twitched, and without understanding why, he took a step forward, instinctively crouching low to avoid detection. He could hear the footsteps drawing closer, and Zora's voice cut through the static. Good. You're doing fine. But get ready. There's no turning back now. John swallowed hard. His body felt different now, lighter somehow, more responsive. It was as if he was suddenly in tune with a whole other level of existence. He could feel the data surging through him, the algorithms making their way into his brain, offering him glimpses of strategies, of movement. His hand lifted slightly, and before he could think, a sharp surge of energy shot through his arm. The walls around him flickered, the virtual environment reacting to his presence, almost as if the world itself was bending to accommodate him. Now you've got it, Zora said, a note of approval in her voice. Use it. You're not just in this world now, you're part of it. You can shape it. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps stopped. John froze, his breath caught in his throat. He could sense them now, two figures, their shapes blurring in and out of existence. They weren't human, not by any stretch of the imagination. Their movements were jerky, mechanical, like they were glitches in the system. They were a part of the war, just like Zora had warned him. John's heart slammed against his ribcage. He was in it now, he wasn't just an observer. He was a player in this strange digital battlefield, and the stakes were real. The figures began to move in his direction, and panic flared inside him. But Zora's calm voice cut through the chaos, steady and unwavering. Focus. Get ready. Without fully understanding how, John shifted his stance, a strange fluidity taking over his limbs as he moved. It was as though his body was being guided by Zora's movements, her combat knowledge merging with his own newly awakened instincts. He was connected to her now, more deeply than he ever could have imagined. The connection between them wasn't just an exchange of thoughts, it was a blending of capabilities, of skills. One of the mechanical figures turned toward him, its face distorted, a mass of shifting polygons and incomprehensible code. Its eyes glowed a menacing red, and it raised its weapon. John didn't think, he just moved. His hand shot out, and in an instant, a surge of energy passed through him. The virtual environment around him shifted as a wall of data formed between him and the approaching figure. The figure's attack slammed into the wall, sending a shockwave that reverberated through the ground. The figure staggered, momentarily thrown off balance. Zora's voice hummed in the back of his mind. Nice move. But don't stop now. Finish it. John's legs moved before he could stop them. He rushed forward, his body instinctively diving into a roll to avoid the next incoming strike. The virtual world bent and twisted around him as he navigated the chaos. It was like nothing he'd ever felt before. It wasn't just his body, it was the very code of the world reacting to his movements, shaping itself to match his actions. The second figure lunged, its movements jerky and unnatural. Without thinking, John raised his hand, and a strange pulse of energy shot out, enveloping the figure in a shockwave that sent it crashing to the ground, its form flickering violently as the digital code that made it up unraveled and fell apart. It was as if he'd broken it, shattered its existence with a simple thought. John stood, panting, his chest heaving. His mind was racing. He had just defeated two enemies, digitally, yes, but still. He had done it. And it hadn't been a fluke. The energy surged inside him, as if the virtual world itself was bending to his will, as if it recognized him now, not as a hapless engineer, but as something more. Zora's voice was quieter this time, but no less sharp. You did good. But don't get cocky. This is only the beginning. You've got enemies coming from all directions. And now that you've shown them what you can do, they're going to come for you. John's pulse raced, but this time, it was no longer from fear. There was something else, something that felt almost like power, a sense of control he hadn't felt in the real world. He wasn't just a bystander. He was part of something bigger. The digital world, with all its chaos and instability, had become his battleground. And for the first time in a long time, John felt like he belonged. Suddenly, the ground beneath his feet trembled. The figures he had defeated flickered back into view, but they weren't alone. More of them, more hostile digital entities, emerged from the shadows, their movements mechanical and fluid, their red eyes glowing with menace. "Looks like the welcoming party has arrived," Zora said, her tone calm but urgent. "Time to get moving, John. If we don't leave now, we're going to be swarmed." John didn't need any further encouragement. His body moved, instincts kicking in as he sprinted through the distorted landscape. He didn't know where he was going, but it didn't matter. Zora's presence, her guidance, was enough to keep him focused. He could feel the pulse of the virtual world around him, the energy shifting with each step he took. It was as if the very code was alive, reacting to his every movement. The chase was on. The battle had just begun. John's feet pounded against the digital pavement, his mind and body synchronized in a way he couldn't fully comprehend. It was as though he was no longer just a participant in this strange virtual world, he had become a force of nature, shaping the very environment around him. The structures, the pathways, even the air felt more real now, more alive, responding to his every movement. Zora's voice was calm in his mind, cutting through the rising chaos. "You're doing well. Keep moving." John's lungs burned as he ran, trying to keep pace with the rapidly shifting landscape. The city around him seemed to pulse and flicker with every step he took. There was something undeniably surreal about this world, digital yet real, stable yet volatile. He could feel the vibrations in his bones as the ground shuddered beneath him, almost as if the system itself were alive, reacting to their intrusion. The figures that had appeared earlier weren't far behind, and more were emerging from the shadows. Their glowing red eyes pierced the air like predators hunting their prey. John didn't know exactly what they were, but he knew they weren't friendly. And now that they had seen what he was capable of, they were relentless in their pursuit. "You've got to get to the Nexus," Zora said, her voice sharp, her tone no longer laced with sarcasm. "The Nexus is where the real power in this world lies. We can use it to either escape or turn the tide of this war in our favor." John's eyes darted around. He didn't even know what the Nexus was. But from the way Zora spoke, it sounded like his best chance for survival. It was clear that the digital enemies weren't going to stop. They were closing in fast, moving with a speed and precision that was almost predatory. A sharp, metallic screech echoed from behind him, and John glanced over his shoulder just in time to see a massive wave of distorted figures closing in. His heart pounded harder in his chest as he pushed himself harder, his legs burning with the effort. Zora's instructions flooded his mind like a lifeline. "Remember, you can manipulate the code around you. You're connected. The world will bend to your will if you can focus. You just need to let it." John didn't have time to second-guess himself. He reached out with his mind, trying to grasp the energy that flowed through the virtual landscape. At first, it was like trying to catch smoke with his bare hands, but slowly, ever so slowly, he felt the system respond. His feet barely touched the ground as he sprinted forward, and with a surge of focus, he commanded the world to shift. A towering wall of data erupted in front of him, blocking the incoming swarm of digital creatures. They crashed against it, their forms flickering, unable to break through. The energy he had harnessed from the system felt strange, almost like he was bending reality itself. His senses were overloaded with the raw, untamed force of it, but there was something exhilarating in the power. "Good job," Zora said, her voice a little less distant, a little more approving. "You're getting the hang of this." John didn't have time to bask in the moment of victory. The wall would only hold for so long, and he could hear the growing buzz of more enemies materializing in the distance. They weren't going to stop. "Where's the Nexus?" he demanded. "I can't keep this up forever." Zora's voice flickered with urgency. "Just keep running. You're close. I can feel it. The Nexus is just ahead. It's your way out." With every stride, John pushed himself harder. His breath came in ragged gasps, and his vision blurred from the intensity of the chase. But now, something had changed in him. He wasn't just a scared software engineer anymore. He was someone who had tapped into a force far beyond his comprehension. The city around him was starting to shift again. Buildings warped and distorted as if reacting to the shift in his perception. The skyline once filled with towering, impassive structures now bent and twisted, the architecture itself becoming fluid, malleable. It was as if the world knew he was in charge now. Another surge of energy shot through his body, and John felt himself move faster, more fluidly, as though his legs were no longer touching the ground at all. The enemies behind him had stopped their pursuit, at least for a moment. But the momentary reprieve didn't last long. The ground beneath him vibrated again, and another wave of figures emerged, this time larger, more menacing. They were moving faster than before, and the digital pulse of their presence was overwhelming. John couldn't keep running forever, and he knew it. But in this moment, something about the way the world bent to his will made him feel like he could. He pushed forward, hoping against hope that the Nexus was really where Zora said it was. Just a little further, Zora urged, her voice quieter now, almost reverent. You're almost there. The Nexus, it's a place of pure potential. It'll give us the power to turn the tables. It's our chance to end this before it's too late. He reached the edge of the city, and ahead of him stood a towering structure, unlike anything he had seen in the virtual world so far. It wasn't a building, at least not in the traditional sense. It was a massive, shifting network of glowing lines and swirling code, twisting in on itself like a digital vortex. The Nexus. It pulsed with power, a center of pure information. John could feel it in his bones, could sense the current of raw energy flowing through the system, waiting for someone to tap into it. The figures behind him didn't slow their pursuit, but John didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the Nexus, the last barrier between him and the unknown. Get in there, now. Zora urged. John reached the center, and in a moment of almost pure instinct, he dove into the swirling mass of code. It was like plunging into a vast ocean of data, the walls of the world closing in around him. The air was thick with the hum of digital currents, the energy so powerful that it made his body feel light, as though he were floating. The moment he entered the Nexus, everything stopped, the city, the enemies, even the ground beneath his feet, all of it ceased to exist in the way he had known it. There was only the Nexus now, only the endless sea of raw, undifferentiated potential. John stood at the center of it, his mind racing as he tried to process the sheer weight of what he had just done. But Zora's voice was clearer than ever, cutting through the chaos. You did it. You've entered the Nexus. Now, we control the system. We can change everything. John felt the power of the Nexus surge through him, felt the world around him shift and bend as he began to understand the depth of the control he now had. He could alter the very fabric of this digital realm. He could reshape it, remold it into whatever he wished. The moment felt like a strange, surreal dream, and yet it was so incredibly real that he couldn't deny it. The power was his. The war that had been raging in the background, threatening to tear everything apart, could be stopped, could be rewritten. The Nexus had given him the key to change everything, but as the power surged through him, he also understood something deeper. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about choice. He had the power to reshape this world, to either join the battle or end it. To use the Nexus for good, or something else entirely. Zora's voice echoed through his mind, her tone no longer sharp, but almost hopeful. It's up to you, John. You've got the power now. What are you going to do with it?